thank you for joining us today for our Future Feed Explorer Series webinar entitled Identifying and Responding to Change, Why Cybersecurity and CMMC Require Continuous Monitoring. Today's webinar is being recorded and all attendees will receive an email with a link to the recording. You can enter questions into the Zoom platform and we'll try to answer as many as we can get to at the end of the presentation. We'll also send a separate email with answers to any questions we aren't able to get to. So today's webinar is sponsored by FutureFeed and by ISI. FutureFeed is the leading cyber GRC platform for the defense industrial base. At FutureFeed, we're committed to securing our nation's supply chain from our adversaries by creating an affordable, collaborative IT management platform. ISI delivers integrated compliance, cybersecurity, and IT solutions purpose-built for small and medium-sized businesses in the defense industrial base. With expert-led CMMC support, outsourced AFSO services, and security control software, ISI helps defense contractors stay secure, audit ready, and contract eligible, eliminating complexity with a single accountable partner for compliance, security, and operational readiness. The Future Feed Explorer series was created to arm defense contractors with the information they need to understand and address the requirements of CMMC. And throughout the series, we'll share critical insights from industry experts and best practices for achieving and sustaining CMMC compliance. Equally important, we'll share the why behind the CMMC program and its requirements. And while the focus of many organizations is on receiving a CMMC certification, the real objective must be on ensuring their ability to protect the sensitive information with which they are entrusted and which they create. CMMC can't be approached as a checkbox exercise. It needs to be viewed as a corporate and an individual responsibility to secure our nation's supply chain from our adversaries. Today's webinar focuses on that responsibility, not as an annual or a triennial event, but as an ongoing commitment. We'll examine the role that continuous monitoring plays in satisfying that commitment, explain CMMC specific requirements for continuous monitoring, and share how organizations can monitor and respond to change to ensure they remain continuously compliant. My name is Stuart Itkin. I am the CRO and the Chief Security Evangelist at FutureFeed, and much of my career is centered on supply chain and vendor risk management and regulatory compliance. I formerly served as a member of the CMMC Standards Working Group and participated in the establishment of the CMMC accreditation body, which is now the Cyber AB. I'm a founding board member of MSPs for the Protection of Critical Infrastructure and a director of the CMMC Industry Standards Council. And joining me today are Rachel Leidy and John Nolan. Rachel is Director of Compliance Education at FutureFeed and is an experienced cybersecurity professional with over 15 years experience implementing and assessing frameworks including NIST 800-171 and 853. Rachel is a CISSP, a certified CMMC assessor, and a certified CMMC professional. Her background spans service in the U.S. Navy and direct support of the DoD. Rachel brings a unique and a real-world experience to cybersecurity and compliance. John Nolan serves as the Vice President of Compliance for ISI Enterprises, where he oversees the compliance program and operations for the company's managed service provider operations. As an IT professional, John has held roles in engineering, cybersecurity, compliance, and project management over the past 23 plus years, with the last 10 focused on the DoD and the DIB, where he became engaged with CMMC at its inception. And along with his team, John has overseen over 150 CMMC gap assessments and remediation projects and has personally assisted C3PAO candidates on their journey to become certified assessors. So Rachel and John, thank you for joining the webinar today. So let's get started. Back in 500 BCE, Heraclitus was overheard one day saying, "No man ever steps into the same river twice." And he said that to make the point that constant change characterizes reality. So while the river might appear to be the same, the water is always flowing, making each moment a different body of water. And people similarly exist in a state of flux, constantly evolving through experience. When the river is stepped into again, both the person and the river are different. And the same is true when it comes to information security. The threat environment, our businesses, our human resources, our infrastructure, they're all constantly changing, and these changes affect the security posture of our organizations. And to maintain our security posture, we must be able to recognize and respond to that change. Last week, the CMMC program reached an important milestone when the 48 CFR rule was passed on to OMB for final review. It's a signal that the final rule could be published in the Federal Register within 30 to 60 days and then become effective 60 days after that. That's as early as October or November of this year. And the importance of 48 CFR is that it enables contracting officers to add CMMC requirements in the form of a new and improved 7021 clause to solicitations and to contracts. And if we look closely at the proposed rules language under procedures, in the highlighted area, it says, quote, contracting officers shall award or shall not award a contract task order or order delivery order to an offeror that does not, and then fast forward to double I, a current affirmation of continuous compliance with the security requirements identified in 32 CFR Part 170. So what this means, not only is certification or self-assessment a condition of award, it means that CMMC is not a point-in-time assessment. It's not pass it and you're done. It's a commitment to continuous compliance, ensuring that as things change inside and outside your organization, you'll take the necessary steps to remain in compliance. And if you say you will and you don't, well, your affirming official could find themselves the subject of a False Claims Act prosecution and potentially an orange jumpsuit model. So let's start at the beginning. And John, help us understand what continuous monitoring actually is. What do we mean by continuous monitoring?
No, absolutely. And I think this is probably one of the biggest things missed by a lot of folks. We look at our compliance journey as a race to the finish line, and really it's lap after lap that you need to look at, keep continually going. So continuous monitoring means you're setting up your policies, your procedures, your technical configurations to continually alert, report, and be reviewed by you and your team. You need to have things in place to actively track systems, users, threats, different types of data that's transferring through your environment, whether that's through conditional access or sensitivity labeling. Your threats are always evolving, right? And I love the metaphor of the river that you can't step in twice, because I mean that's really what it is in the cybersecurity world. The person that attacks you today is not going to be the person that attacks you tomorrow. So having a continually evolving, continually vigilant compliance posture is critical for your security, but also for CMMC certification and to hold that certification going forward. Don't forget there's yearly attestations to it as well. So proven repeatable processes that can be done every day, that aren't something that's done in the month leading up to an audit where everybody's working 14 hours a day. Those are the key pieces that we need to make sure are in place and working for us.
Oh, great. And we look at changes that affect your organization. They can be internal changes that occur within the organization, or they can be external, things that you really don't have control over or necessarily visibility to. So let's start talking about internal change. Rachel, what types of internal change are common, and what is their potential impact?
Yeah, and it's good that we bring this up early on in the discussion when we're talking about continuous monitoring. So for those of you who may not have heard already, continuous monitoring is making sure that you maintain compliant with the requirements throughout your contract life cycle or the system life cycle, and monitoring to make sure you maintain compliance. So you're monitoring the processes that you put in place, the controls that you put in place to meet the requirements on an ongoing process. And why we talk about changes when we talk about continuous monitoring is because changes, and it is a shift that impacts your system, people, processes, or any external factors, and may or may not impact your security or your compliance. So changes are going to happen. changes that's are inevitable, and so you have to monitor for those changes, internal and external. And then certain types of changes are going to impact your security or your level of compliance. And so being able to recognize those changes, and then determine their level of impact is necessary. So for internal changes, you're talking about personnel turnovers, and if you have any security related roles that someone is leaving the company and they had assumed that role. So who's going to pick up that role when that person leaves, or who's going to pick up those responsibilities temporary while you fill up those roles? If you get new systems, new capabilities, new technology into your environment, what kind of data is going to be stored, processed, transmitted? How is it going to be, logically or physically connected with, the systems that are in scope of the requirements? And so you need to monitor system changes, personnel changes, business operation changes that may impact where data is flowing or who you're sharing that data with. Those are what we are referring to when we say internal changes.
Oh, great. And beyond the changes that are internal to the organization that can affect continuous compliance, John, what changes external to an organization affect continuous compliance?
Sure. I mean, there's external to organization really is the evolving threats that are out there in its main form. Regulatory changes. Obviously, CMMC itself is a major change that's coming. That is going to be an external change affecting all of us. Contract language. As you go and you renew contracts, you're bidding on new contracts. There may be different regulatory clauses, different things you have to do that will affect your posture, affect what you have to do to meet those things. But I think one of the biggest things that, from a cybersecurity standpoint, I'll say, would be supply chain risks. It's something we're all going to hear a lot more about over the next year and a half, as supply chain risk management becomes a bigger and bigger piece of this, especially with NIST 800-171 Rev 3 when that comes around and starts applying to CMMC. But the thing to know is threat actors, they don't target the highest point on the ladder. They target lower points on the ladder and work their way up. So receiving emails from a vendor that you just started working with that wasn't properly vetted, or not having the proper cybersecurity awareness in place so your folks know what to look for when receiving things from people that appear on the surface to be valid interactions with your company, could be a threat actor that has infiltrated somebody further down the line. The other key thing to be aware of is vendor updates and vendor changes. We saw a few years back when certain chipsets were blacklisted. People had entire VoIP systems in their offices that needed to be changed because we found out they were transmitting information to China. Just being hyper aware of what's in your environment, how it interacts, and what's going on down the supply chain, whether that be a vendor update or somebody that you get supplies from for a project, is key in understanding what risks are posed to your environment and your business.
And I know, John, we hear a lot about AI. I mean, you can't, turn something on without hearing about AI. I'm sure that AI is going to have an impact on really taking the external threats up a level. Wouldn't you agree?
110%. I mean, AI is an incredibly powerful tool, and it can be used to make us more secure, really, at the end of the day. But it's the care that's put into deploying these tools and the attention to detail when configuring them that really matters. AI specifically, you need to know where it's reaching out to, where it's learning from. More importantly, really, where it's allowing you to be used as a source of learning, because you don't want to be sending all of your company data back up to a learning module somewhere for other companies to use.
Right. And it certainly becomes a tool for threat actors to use to make their threats more sophisticated over time as well, and requiring us to become even that much more vigilant to changes in the external environment. So I know,
Yeah.
Rachel, not all change is created equal, and some changes can have a big impact on security, posture, and compliance, and others a smaller impact. So, how would you suggest an organization assess the impact of change?
Right. Well, not only, do you have to assess, the level of all the changes to determine if they're going to be, if they will impact your level of security or compliance. But you do have to assess these changes per the CM family. There's a requirement in NIST 800-171 that requires you to evaluate changes and specifically conduct a security impact analysis to determine if that change is going to affect your security or level of compliance. And so what you'll do is, as John had mentioned, you're going to implement some tools and mechanisms and even some administrative processes throughout your compliance boundary to monitor for the change. Then once you get indicator or a change is reported to you or requested, you will evaluate that change to determine its impact to your security posture. And so typically you'll have some levels defined, and on this slide I've defined 3 levels: low, medium, high. That's typically what we see out there in the description. You could even utilize that yourself in your own environment if you would like, but at some point there will be a trigger. One of those levels will trigger some deeper evaluation and analysis of that change. And it may result in holding off on that change until your company is ready to move forward and ensure you're compliant and secure throughout the whole process, or updating your implementation plan or implementing additional mitigations to maintain your level of security, ensuring that data is secure, and maintain your compliance level throughout that change process.
Oh, great. So I think we've clearly established, that there is ongoing change. It's internal and external to an organization, and to be aware of these changes, we need to be able to respond. We need to continuously monitor. But Rachel, what specifically does CMMC require with respect to continuous monitoring? Which NIST 800-171 controls describe these requirements?
So the specific NIST 800-171 control or requirement, I should say, the NIST 800-171 requirement that speaks to continuous monitoring is 312.3. And the reason why I corrected myself to call it a requirement and not a control, which is hard for me to do, and I'm still working on it because I come from RMF 853 world, which we refer to 853 controls, the control catalog. And so in my mind, I call it a control. But NIST 800-171, it's a requirement. Okay, monitor security controls on an ongoing basis to ensure the continued effectiveness of the controls. So in this statement, in this requirement statement, control means a safeguard or a countermeasure that was designed and implemented in a system or an environment to protect data and meet a set of requirements. So your control is what you put in place to meet the requirements. There's 110 requirements. That doesn't mean you're going to have 110 controls. There's some controls that will help you, implement multiple requirements. But what you have to do per CA 312.3 is to monitor the controls that you put in place on an ongoing basis to make sure that they are continually implemented and effective. And so all of the CA family requirements kind of work together as I'm depicting in this diagram here. That's why they're in the same domain or family. And so as you get used to 800-171 and CMMC, you're going to realize there's a pattern of conducting an annual assessment and updating and submitting your annual attestation, then remediating any issues, monitoring that, updating your documentation, and it's a continuous process throughout your contract lifecycle or the system lifecycle.
Right, and so we kind of described the what, what are the requirements, but what about the how? How does one go about satisfying these requirements, Rachel?
Yeah, so how you implement continuous monitoring in your own environment, it's going to be specific to your environment and the technologies, capabilities, people, how your environment's designed. So it's continuous monitoring and the evidence of continuous monitoring can look different. For example, if I'm monitoring a administrative process. For example, if you implement at your company for AC 311 a process to, let's say, quarterly review access to your information systems in your environment. That process of reviewing access quarterly was designed and implemented for AC 311. So that way, because under AC 311, you have to limit information system access at all times. Well, to do that and make sure that you are doing that, you've implemented this administrative process to review your access, okay? Well, under CA 312.3, the continuous monitoring requirement, your activity there, what you're going to do there is you're going to check to see if you are doing those quarterly reviews, or you're going to check to see if you have an access control form that you're using for access, is that being used? Is it being used appropriately? Is it being filled out and capturing all the details it needs to capture? And so you're you'll have to design what ongoing monitoring or continuous monitoring looks like for your company, and how you determine frequency of reviewing is some requirements you implement with automated mechanisms like antivirus or a SIEM or audit log solution. Those are running processes in the background at all times running. So they're compliant. They're helping you be compliant at all times. So when you have to review that SIEM to see if it's still configured and the alerts are working appropriately and it's got everything set up and it's collecting the right logs, you may not have to do that as frequently, maybe once a year, twice a year, versus if you have a very manual process of, let's say, requesting access to your environment and it's a paper form with email, that takes human intervention. Humans got to do that. They got to remember to fill out the form and route it the right way and know the process and the procedure. And so the likelihood that that administrative manual process is going to fail is going to be greater than maybe your SIEM that you have running and you have some backup supply power for your network. And so what ongoing monitoring? It's monitoring the controls that you design and you implement in your environment to meet NIST 800-171, reviewing those on an ongoing basis, and you determine that frequency based on likelihood of failure, risk of failure, and impact.
Oh, great. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive then. And in the same way there are internal and external changes, there's also technical and non-technical monitoring activities. And let's start with the technical. John, can you explain what we mean by technical monitoring activities and provide a couple of examples for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So technical monitoring is going to be what Rachel referred to earlier. Most of the time is your automated monitoring. It's going to be what the tools that you've put in place are doing for you. I struggle to say that it's the most important because it's really not. We saw on the last slide that there were three types: automated, manual, and then hybrid at the bottom. And I just think it's important to note that the hybrid is really what you should be doing for everything. Everything has two sides to it that should be evaluated. And even on a technical monitoring piece like this, there are manual processes. That being said, you're looking at things like system logs and alerts. So this would be when somebody logs in, somebody does a elevated permissions action, like changes the permissions to a folder or something along those lines. Network traffic analysis. You want to know if you've got a bunch of traffic coming in from Britain all of a sudden, or from India out of nowhere that you didn't have before. Endpoint detect and response, especially in today's world where we're so dynamic in where we work from. We're not centralized in an office for the most part anymore. Understanding what's happening at the endpoint is crucial. And then patch vulnerability management, really the foundation for the security of your hardware devices, whether that's a laptop or a firewall or switch, what have you. Now, the key thing to know about all of these is that your worst enemy is the word default. Any of these tools that you get are going to have a default configuration, and that will never be the way you want it to stay. You want to make sure that these are configured specific to your environment and your purposes. And then, strangely enough, the one thing most people miss on these is the alerting of it. All tools at this point, I feel comfortable and confident saying all tools, but somebody could prove me wrong, have the capability to alert someone if there's a problem. You don't always have to go in and see what it is. So understanding what those capabilities are for your tools and making sure that they're configured, even if it's something as simple as an email alert to your IT admin, something so that somebody's notified immediately when these tools catch something that you need to be aware of, making sure that's configured as well, are all on your path to success with these types of tools.
Yeah. And I think there's some examples of great fails to continuously monitor and respond, and especially when we look at things like patch management, that a vulnerability is discovered, and it's not just those that have the software that become aware of the vulnerability, it's the adversaries that become aware of it and develop exploits. And what was it? I think Equifax, a good example of that.
Oh yeah, there's been a ton, but you're absolutely right, Stuart. When a vulnerability comes out, and we hear about them pretty much every day now, whether it's Wawa had a breach or CrowdStrike had an issue. When those things hit the news, you can be certain that the bad guys are seeing it too, and that fuse is lit. They've now figured out what door they need to try and break into, and they're going to try to break into it. So it's very important when you get these notices from Apple must send them out once a month at this point of some new 0-day issue they have. If you're an iPhone user, it's important that not just you, but all of your users as well, with most of us using our personal devices for work email. It's important that we're not only cognizant of those alerts, but understanding that it is an urgent, time-sensitive matter, and you and the bad guys are both racing to either lock that door or get in that door at the same time.
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say that our adversaries are continuously monitoring as well, right?
Yeah, to no end.
Absolutely. And again, Rachel, information security it's not just about technology, as we said. About 45 of the 800 controls are non-technical. So we need to be monitoring more than technology. So, what about non-technical monitoring, and why is that important?
Yeah, and I'll keep this one short because I think I've covered this a couple times already. But non-technical monitoring is evaluating those manual or administrative processes that you have implemented or should be implemented in your environment to help you meet the requirements and keep the data secure. And so, John made a good point. I would say almost all of it's all hybrid because most controls you have a portion of the control is automated in some way, and then it's, initiated or supported by some non-technical, documentation or processes that are implemented. And so what monitoring of those would look like is to be reviewing and seeing if that documentation is being followed. Or did something change within your environment that should have warranted in a documentation update but didn't, and so you need to update that document, or maybe you are actively handling that change and so you're updating the document uh, because you're planning to implement that change. And so just monitoring those non-technical administrative processes or controls that you have implemented in your environment. Um, throughout the contract lifecycle.
And Rachel, isn't really culture within a company part of this as well? While we set up periodic monitoring or reviews of certain things, I mean, isn't it important for an organization to kind of build a culture that when something changes, people start to think to themselves, what could this affect? How is this going to affect our organization's security posture?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As if you're new to the world of cybersecurity compliance or implementing these requirements, you'll get to a point where you're going to realize that in your day to day, in the weekly, monthly, quarterly, maybe it's best if you implement sort of some checklist or a trigger that helps you continuously implement or review these controls that you have in your environment. And definitely reviewing the changes, you have to do that for a requirement in the configuration management family. 343, I think, or 344 is to evaluate the security impact of changes. Okay. And so it's very important, both technical and non-technical monitoring, and they usually go hand in hand.
Right. And getting people to think, just when something changes in the environment, as we know that it always is, to think about, well, what could this change affect? How might it affect our organization's security postures? So, certainly very important. And, again, continuous monitoring, it is essential to maintain a level of cybersecurity to be continuously compliant. But, I think the question really is, so, where do you start? And John, how should a company implement continuous monitoring? And what are some of the best practices you can refer us to?
Absolutely. So, you see in front of you, there's 6 icons that really kind of highlight the pillars of getting started with continuous monitoring and things that you'll want to really consider as you go through. The first and foremost is baselining, and ironically enough, it's one I've seen most people miss, or at least miss in part across the board. It lines up directly with CM controls for system baselining. And essentially what this is saying is that you need to set a minimum requirement for your environment, period. Whether that's firewalls, whether that's laptops, any kind of hardware that's in your environment, you need a minimum when it comes to things like firmware, operating system, software versions. All of these things are critical to not only have, but document. Then you're going to want to prioritize by risk. Depending on the size of your company and the levels and layers you have in place, this can be a very large time-consuming project. So you want to start where the most impact will be felt, we'll say. Now, there's 2 of these that I think really go together. I like having them separate here, but it's important that you think about them as 2 parts of the same whole. And that's automating where you can and making it sustainable. All too often, especially when we look at the cost of cybersecurity tools, it's easy to say, well, that's just something I can do myself, or I have IT guys that can do this. But things like log monitoring, for instance, that is one step down that road without an automated tool, and you're buried. We're talking hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of logs a day, depending on your company. And having a tool to automate being able to see the forest through the trees, being able to know what's important and what's not. Because you can spend all the money in the world, you can have all the high-end tools, you can have the cutting edge of everything. But if it's not telling you what you need to know or what's important at the time, it's useless. So really understanding the capability, understanding how you can automate it to fit your team, and understanding what's not needed is almost sometimes more important than understanding what is needed. Then the human layer. All of this, no matter every webinar you'll attend this year, every cybersecurity informational session you ever attend in your life, there will always be one common string, and that's that we are the weak part. We're the weak link in the chain, the humans. These tools, even the most automated tools, can do some pretty awesome and amazing things, but when we live in a world where people need to be productive and people need the latitude to work within their environment, so we can never lock things down enough to remove the human layer. So ensuring that your team is aware of the risks, but also aware of your internal policies, what you've put together, what you're expecting of them, what they need to do to support these things. It could be something as simple as make sure you reboot your computer once a week, because otherwise you're not going to get the updates you need. That becomes just as an important part of this process as having the policy in the first place. Because if your end users are not getting hip to the game, then none of this is going to work properly.
Yeah. And John, you mentioned the importance of the human element and absolutely critical. And I think some of the organizations, that we know in the defense industrial base, don't necessarily have on staff the resources with either the cybersecurity or the IT experience to really work with some of these tools, though that is still necessary. So isn't this where companies like ISI come in to be able to help them?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mentioned earlier, default being your worst enemy, and I've seen that personally quite a bit, where folks will go out and spend on these tools for their environments, but they're all, the tool is only part of the equation. Having the expertise to configure it and report on it and alert on it, and then knowing what to do with that information is more critical even than the setup of the tool initially. So yeah, having an expert in play that can help you understand what to make of the information you're getting, yes, but also how to initially configure it to best suit your environment so you're not getting buried and you're getting actionable intel is extremely important.
Right. So there is help available for
Yes.
organizations looking to be able to set this up and create it. Oh, great.
Absolutely. And I just on that note, make sure that no matter who you're going with, that you have your due diligence, you interview the teams you're planning to work with, and you understand the capability of who you're asking to help you. Because I think, as we all know, CMMC is a bit of a buzzword in the industry at the moment, and it is any marketing team worth their salt is throwing it on any web page out there, regardless of the capability of the actual team. So just make sure that whoever you're working with, it's more than just a highlight on their website. It's something that they're invested in and knowledgeable about that can help you.
Yeah, absolutely true. And there's a lot involved in establishing and maintaining a continuous monitoring program. Hey, Rachel, how can a cyber GRC platform like FutureFeed support a company's efforts to be continuously compliant?
Great question. And I would highly recommend a tool, a GRC tool, Future Feed specifically, but really, tools like Future Feed and GRC tools, they're going to help you uh, a lot throughout your compliance journey. Um, I've been doing compliance management, implementation, evaluation, and assessments for over 10 years now. And throughout that 10 years, 15 years, there were times where I had to do manual, like system security plan maintenance, or manual POEM maintenance, all manual communication and project management. And so what a tool, GRC tools, what they do is they bring all those essential communication functionalities and tasking functionalities, scheduling functionalities, evidence capturing capabilities with automated SSP and POAM updates, making the just the administrative workload alone with handling, compliance for your environment, a lot less man hours throughout the year. And so, specifically for the Future Feed users who've joined this conference in Future Feed, or I'm sorry, this webinar in Future Feed, you can create tasks in your security documentation or your security technology, which will trigger and alert people when it's time to do something related to continuous monitoring, or reviewing one of your controls that you have implemented. And so in Future Feed, you can create those tasks, and also you have with a click access to your system security plan, which is critical because that's where you're going to read about how you've implemented the requirements and the controls that you've implemented and designed in your environment. So when you have to review that control to see if it's still implemented and working as intended, you're going to look at your SSP, because you have to figure out, well, how was it designed? How was it implemented? And so I would, for my future feed users, when it comes to continuous monitoring, we use the RACI model in future feed for very clear responsibility when it comes to continuous monitoring. And a suggestion for my future feed users, or really anybody on the call, I believe that the person who should be involved with continuous monitoring activities should be that accountable role. That's the person who needs to make sure that the processes that have been implemented, the controls that have been implemented, are still being implemented and followed and adhered to by the people who are responsible in that RACI model. But if you're not using future feed, many GRC tools will bring this type of data to you in a dashboard like Layout. Future feed is, of course, my preferred tool of use, but yeah, they'll help you a lot with planning the effort, even during the effort, and then capturing the evidence afterward.
I can attest to that. Having used Future Feed for about 6 years now, I can attest to that completely. Yeah.
And I know Rachel is a little biased, but I think one of the benefits of any GRC tool, Future Feed or others, is that when you set up things like tasks in the tool to be able to conduct things like a change management board on a regular basis, you're also creating the audit log or creating the objective evidence that's required for the assessment or the next assessment you'd be going through. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. In future feed, when you close out a task, you have to log that evidence. There's no way of bypassing it.
Yeah.
And so for the users, just in general, when you do your continuous monitoring efforts, do capture that evidence throughout the year. An assessor will want to see that.
Great. So it helps you enforce the fact that you're doing the continuous monitoring you've said you were going to do, but it also then keeps kind of track or keeps the evidence that in fact you've done what it is that you've said you're going to do. So,
Yeah.
great. Well, I know we covered a lot over this last 45 minutes. And I want to thank you, John and Rachel, for an informative discussion. I just want to summarize what it is that we have heard. Again, change, we said, is continuous, and change creates risk. And monitoring becomes essential to be able to detect and to respond to change. To be secure and to satisfy CMMC, you need to be continuously compliant. CMMC, as we said, is not a point in time. It's an obligation to be continuously secure, continuously compliant. And to be continuously compliant, CMMC requires specifically that you continuously monitor. And it's not just the technology, it's non-technical monitoring that's as important. And I think the point to emphasize is, compliance isn't the objective. It's security. We don't do continuous monitoring so that we can check the box to say, yep, we've satisfied that 800-171 control so we can pass the test. Again, we need to think of this in terms of really a security mindset and posture, and realize that we're doing this to ensure our ability to protect the sensitive information with which we're entrusted and with which we create. So with that, and before we move on to questions, let me remind everyone that you can sign up for future episodes of our Future Feed Explorers webinar series. And you can also replay past episodes on our YouTube channel. And with that, why don't we move to some questions? I think, Peter, you've been monitoring the questions and can direct those to the panel.
Yes, I have. And so I think, John, this was one I answered this in the Q&A, but John, I think it might be good if you comment on it. For a small company with less than 10 employees on the technical side who utilize M365, Sentinel, Windows devices, Intune, Defender, and GCC High, is there anything else you would suggest to help meet these standards?
So one of the nice things about Microsoft's cloud tenants these days, at least, is they've increased their capability and their, let's be honest, quality to a point where they really are top in class solutions. And pretty much everything you'll need to do can be found within the Microsoft tenant, provided you're using all the different modules and you have the licenses in place. The one thing that really I find lacking, at least in the Microsoft tenant, is a ticketing system. Technically, you can use SharePoint, Power BI, and a few other things put together to make a ticketing system, Microsoft Forms, for instance. But ticketing systems are always something I think are more helpful from third parties. There's just a lot more capability, functionality, and it's also something a lot of people overlook. I mean, that's where all of your tracking, your change management can come from, and a lot of stuff like that. So, ticketing, and then an RMM tool of some sort for your endpoints, remote monitoring and maintenance. Intune can be used for this, really for all points you need to hit. But implementing a specific RMM tool will give you some functionality capability, make it easier to handle.
And then there was a question, I think that anybody who wants to answer this. My argues is future feed. When reaching out to C3 PAOs, I was told by one that future feed was unacceptable, and they insisted on using the GRC, which that was specified by the C3 PAO. This included having to pay for the GRC tool as part of the assessment. Why are C3 PAOs doing this? And my reaction to that is they shouldn't be, but I'll let the folks from Future Feed comment on this.
Yeah, well, I'm not future feed, but I will say that popped out at me as well as something that definitely should not be, unless I'm missing something. Nobody should be dictating what tools you can use. And I can tell you, as from an outside perspective, we've gone through 6 audits using Future Feed, and it's got a specific auditor security permissions level that gives them a view that's tuned to the audit, and it works wonderfully for that. So that is very strange, but I'll let Stuart and Rachel speak on that.
No,
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Stuart.
I was going to say, my reaction is I'm kind of aghast. I mean, first of all, a GRC platform or a compliance management tool is a tool for the organization. It's not a tool for the assessor to be able to use. It's a tool that enables an organization to go through the process of ensuring that they conform with the set of requirements, but it's also becomes, the foundation for an ongoing compliance management program that they're using. Again, it's a tool for, the OSC, for the defense contractor, the subcontractors and suppliers to be using. Secondarily, I can't count the number of assessments Future Feed clients have been through, both DIBCAC assessments and C3PAO assessments. And in fact, that we have found that assessments tend to take less time for clients that are using Future Feed than if they are not using a GRC tool. So I just find that is really odd. If the individual who submitted that question wouldn't mind submitting to us who their C3 PAO was, we'd certainly like the opportunity to just discuss that with them directly. Rachel, you wanted to add something?
No, I think you covered it, but just to, pull out one main point that I think is really important is future feed or any GRC tool that's for your company. Your company is using that and deciding to use that to manage and house your compliance management program. So you can use whatever tool you choose. It's not part of the assessment. It's not a tool that will be used during the assessment at all. If for our future feed users on the call, what I recommend during your assessment is to definitely have future feed up and running during your assessment so you can follow along within the SSP or the assess area and review your control and even pull up evidence as you need to throughout your interviews that you're going to have. But no, nothing else to add.
Yeah, in general, I would look for open-minded C3 PAOs, not someone who says my way or the highway.
110%.
Great.
Um,
Yeah, and it's up to the organization to choose the C3PAO they work with.
yes. And in this is from Mark Bosjanek. In monitoring the environment, is it possible that a change in the environment could raise a red flag that would require recertification, even though the current certification may be in year 1 or 2? A lot of discussion about this in the community. So
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely depending on the scope of the change, but there are absolutely changes you can make to your environment that will trigger a reassessment. I mean, first thing I think of off the top of my head is if you change offices or do a network refresh that changes out networking hardware or some core piece of your environment, or if you decide that you want to move from Google to Microsoft and you move your cloud tenant, that's another piece. So any of that core functionality. But
Yeah.
Rachel, any thoughts on anything else?
No, but definitely you'll want to have an understanding of where that line is, or what those types of changes look like in your environment that would trigger recertification or reassessment. And when you define those impact levels for your environment, low, moderate, high, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you want to use, one of those levels should indicate, hey, this has got a pretty big impact to security level of compliance. And you have to evaluate those changes again under the CM family. But for CMMC, for just give a little background information for folks, when you get a certification, that certification is tied to that environment and the compliance management program that your company has implemented to meet NIST 800-171. And so in general, I like to think of any changes that don't fit your form, they don't fit the same, form, fit, or function as the system, location, environments, capabilities that are in your certification. Those that fall outside that scope most likely would warrant recertification or reassessment. So when I say form, fit, or function, if you have Windows, let's say Windows 11 in your environment, and you're just bringing on a couple new Windows 11 computers because you've picked up some business and brought on some new employees, that type of change, it's not going to warrant recertification, reassessment, because when you were certified, you had Windows 11 or 10, I forgot what I said already, in your environment. And so that baseline configuration, when you deploy those assets, it's going to meet that approved baseline and all the settings and everything else. But let's say you want to add a RHEL 7 server to your environment, and that wasn't part of your environment that was assessed and certified. That's a big change. That's a major change. It's definitely different. It's not the same form, fit, or function. It's new capability, new technology. And so that's the type of change that would warrant reassessment or recertification.
And while the Cyber AB hasn't, specifically established guidelines for the threshold of what would constitute a significant change, I think we can certainly expect that to be coming and to get some of those guidelines coming from the Cyber AB. I know that we are just about at 2 o'clock, and John, Rachel, and I are happy to hang on and to answer other questions, to hang around as long as others want to stay on. As I said, we will provide answers to the questions in a email that we will send out to all attendees as well. And additionally, you should think of the three of us as just kind of resources. If you do have questions, you'll see our contact information on this slide. And so if there's a question that comes up after this webinar, please feel free to reach out to John, Rachel, or myself, and we'd be happy to to provide whatever guidance and answer we can. So again, thank you to everybody joining us today. We do appreciate your investing an hour of your time with us. And as we said, we'll continue to hang on to be able to go through other questions that may exist. So Peter, do we have any other questions?
Does Future Hat Feed have a reminder capability for the recurring items like review processes, procedures, etc.? the non-technical checks that we have in our objective statements?
Yes, yes, we do. So in future feed, what you'll want to do is set up that task and assign that task to an individual or a role. And then with that user, when they log into future feed, if they go to their dashboard, they're going to see all of their tasks with the due dates. And I think there's some color coding of when things are, past due or about to be past due. And then also make sure that that user has enabled within their user settings up in the top right corner, go to your user settings. There's some preferences in there about notifications. So make sure they enable email notifications. So then when they get a new task, poem, assignment, document assignment, or any responsibility in future feed, not only will it show up on their dashboard, but then they'll get that email notification when they have new items or upcoming due items.
And can you add your own plugins for auditing?
In future feed at this time, we do not have any plugin capability.
And the last question is, will we be providing a recording of this presentation?
The answer is yes. We will be sending out a follow-up email. You may get one from both Future Feed and from ISI. We will include a link to the replay for the webinar, as well as a link to be able to download a copy of the slides. And again, let me emphasize, if people have additional questions outside of the webinar, please feel free to reach out to any one of the three of us, and we'd be more than happy to respond to you.
And that is all the questions, Stuart.
Well, great. Well, again, thank you to everybody for joining us today. Again, kind of follow us both on LinkedIn, ISI, and Future Feed, and look for announcements for the next upcoming episode of the Future Feed Explorers webinar series. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Have a great day.